Chapter 37. The Deception. Shrouded in curtains of green and red light, two frigates held position just above the north pole of a gas giant. Aboard the Kailasha, Axiom watched the enemy approach. 29 Destican warships were advancing on the sanctuary moon, but they were no longer moving at flank speed, and Axiom was responsible for that. Just as Ino had instructed, Axiom and his crew of AI and synthetic volunteers had embarked on a massive deception project. When the enemy fleet came into sensor range, both Kailasha and her sister ship Ambika started to launch sensor decoys. These little satellites were barely larger than escape pods, but carried a full suite of communication systems. Once launched, the decoys began broadcasting signals to the Kailasha, to the Ambika, and to each other. These signals included recognition codes, orders and acknowledgements, schedules, and radio checks. The incoming enemy fleet had picked up on these transmissions and deployed into a battle formation. Cyber warfare was Axiom's element. It was exactly what he had been built for when Marathon was barely more than a gleam in the shipbuilder's eye. Even though he no longer had access to Marathon's impressive cyber warfare suite, Axiom had still managed to cook up an impressive trick. Using these decoys, Axiom created the illusion of a coalition fleet staging for battle inside the sensory blind spot created by the gas giant's magnetic field. Years ago, Ino had become famous for exploiting this natural phenomenon in a war game. Now this high-risk tactic was being tested against a real enemy. And it was working. Axiom did not need to stop the enemy cold, simply slow them down, buy time for the Coalition and Savanti defenders to finish their work on the colonial cloaking device. So he did his utmost to draw the enemy's attention. Command, we are being scanned. HAR, one of the Coalition military androids, worked alongside other AI to operate the ship's sensors. She spoke to Axiom via electronic signals, far faster than the spoken word. What is the source of the scan? Axiom inquired. The enemy flagship, the battleship Sonomoni, AJR replied. It is scanning for life forms. Axiom shifted his attention to the brig, where two medical androids had tampered with one of the ship's omnidirectional antennas to do something devious. Before Kailasha launched, Ino had given Axiom the splintered fragment of horn Elodie broke off Araj's head. Using this horn fragment, a bioscanner, and the tampered antenna, the medical androids were generating Destican life signs, then broadcasting them into space. This part of the deception was not foolproof. At minimum, the enemy would be led to believe that Axiom had Destican prisoners aboard Kailasha. He was hoping that the enemy would recognize Araj's life signs specifically and come to his rescue. Such an action would pull starships out of formation, delaying the assault on the sanctuary moon even longer. Axiom shifted his attention once more. Using data acquired from both scans and previously known data, he was able to see the defensive onion of enemy ships, the maximum ranges of their weapons, of the defenses, and of the sensor systems. Axiom could see that he had just 5 days left before the enemy was close enough to spot the colony and attack it with long-range missiles. Unfortunately, once the enemy was close enough to attack, they would still be outside the effective range of any planet-based weapon on the sanctuary moon. There would be no battle, only slaughter. After running calculations for several hours, the dozens of AI crew members, plus Axiom, came to an agreement. The time had come. Axiom dove deep into his memory and found every tactical analysis of the Galax incident, the now famous war game where Ino had pulled off this very same stunt he was about to attempt. Then he started to give orders. Launch all remaining decoys. Transmit the false hyperspace signal. While new decoys were pushed into orbit, the pre-existing ones started to transmit an ultra-high-frequency signal. A sensor technician who picked up this broadcast could have easily mistaken it for a ship exiting hyperspace. Just before the go signal, a final conversation passed between Kailasha and Ambika. Axiom, delegate. Ambika is preparing to jettison a shielded beacon pod. Please mark its position. This is Axiom. Position marked. I will recover the Astro Creator's nuclei if you do not survive. Thank you. I hope you join the synthetic nation once our freedom is secured. I intend to be there on day 0, delegate. Ambika is ready to attack. Engage engines. Weapons hot. The two warships, surrounded by a spherical formation of electronic decoy pods, started to move away from their hiding spot. Axiom took direct control of the maneuvering thrusters, guiding Kailasha along a series of very fine course corrections. For the moment, both starships were staying inside the sensory blind spot, but they would have to emerge from it soon. This was where Axiom would create his own version of the Esperanta maneuver. Ino's original escapade had been a single flyby attack with no option to re-engage. Axiom adjusted his trajectory so that Kailasha remained in a hyperbolic orbit around Acrux 4. He would shoot past the enemy, then turn and fall back toward the gas giant. With luck, Kailasha and Ambika would find another sensory blind spot near the magnetic south pole. Then Kailasha could swing around the gas giant for another flyby attack, while Ambika carried out the final part of Ino's plan. This plan had one major downside. Kailasha would be following a highly predictable path. If the enemy figured out what was happening, a lethal ambush could be prepared. Knowing this, Axiom decided to be adaptable. Kailasha and Ambika burned their engines one last time and then went dark. The frigates soared through space in silence, their drive cones growing cold. Around them, the decoys adjusted their formation, placing themselves in front of the two frigates. "We've been detected," AJR reported. 40 seconds to fly by. The enemy started to break formation, turning their weapons against the incoming fleet. Axiom quickly saw that a majority of target locks were against Ambika, and that the enemy appeared reluctant to fire on Kailasha, the vessel which supposedly had Araj Zilfalin aboard. 30 seconds to fly by. Even though they did not have weapons, the decoys focused their radar systems on the enemy ships, creating an illusory target lock. Believing they were about to be fired upon, some of the enemy reacted. Destican warships started to launch countermeasures and decoys of their own. A couple of pilots lost their nerve and broke formation. 20 seconds to fly by. The Destican fleet opened fire. A barrage of missiles rose up to meet the coalition warships. Axiom deployed electromagnetic countermeasures. The anti-ship missiles veered off course as their radars were jammed. 10 seconds. Weapons range. Kailasha and Ambika opened fire. The enemy responded in kind. Missiles, torpedoes, railgun slugs, disruptor bolts, and laser beams crisscrossed in the void for a few terrifying seconds. And then there was a great conflagration as the two fleets intersected. At the last moment, the decoy drones fired their thrusters and put themselves into collision courses with the enemy ships. The inky darkness of space lit up with white flashes, one after another, as ships collided in the dark. Kailasha shot past Sonomoni with meters to spare, raking the battleship with disruptor fire as she went by. Ambika plowed nose first into an oncoming torpedo, but the warhead failed to detonate, embedding itself deep within the commandeered frigate. Ambika found a little more luck, blasting a cruiser with all of her weapons as she cut through the enemy formation. The fight was over in seconds. Kailasha and Ambika fired up their engines and sped away from the scene, deploying every countermeasure in their arsenal to discourage counterattacks. Kailasha dove for the gas giant, and several enemy vessels gave chase. Just as Axiom hoped, an attempt to rescue Araj Zilfalin was underway. Meanwhile, Ambika pushed its engines as hard as possible, using the gravity assist to make a desperate, mad dash for a nearby hyperlane that led to the Hodronus wormhole, to Coalition territory. Down on the Sanctuary Moon, Ino watched the battle play out through a telescope on the roof of the Savanti Administration Building. She snapped her fingers and let out a cheer. "Oh, well, I'll be damned! He copied me!" Ino declared to the assembled group. Sota nudged Elodie. "Pay up," he told her with a grin. Prisbin peered back and forth, tapping his tablet computer nervously. "What kind of damage did he do?" Prisbin asked. Ino pressed her eye back into the telescope. "Looks like 2 corvettes were destroyed outright. 5 frigates damaged, 6 destroyers damaged, 3 cruisers damaged, and the Sonomoni itself is damaged too." "We have to turn on that cloak in the next few days," Prisbin announced. "The enemy fleet is distracted right now dealing with Axiom. We can't afford to let them get any closer while we're still detectable." Ino turned to Rylan, Sota, and Chief Engineer Kazuki. "It's the moment of truth," Ino said. "Are we ready?" Kazuki nodded. "The Savanti authorities are getting ready to power down all non-essential functions in the colony," Sota said. "The less energy we use, the harder we'll be to spot." "As soon as the final consensus is complete, we'll power down most of the network systems as well," Rylan said. "Final consensus?" Sota repeated. "We are close to choosing a new oracle," Rylan said. "Very few candidates remain." "How are you doing?" Ino asked. "I heard you were still in the running." "I'm faring better than expected," Rylan replied absent-mindedly, refusing to make eye contact. "Oracle Aster himself has been mathematically eliminated from contention. So, to use a human expression, the election is wide open. Hopefully, we will know the results by tomorrow morning." Ino's command team dispersed, heading out to make final preparations for the activation of the colonial cloaking device. Eventually, once Prisbin packed up his laptop and left, Ino and Rylan were alone on the rooftop. "My people found the wreck of the vivarium," Rylan told Ino in a hushed voice. "Obviously, we don't have time to move the whole ship, but the crucial components and data storage drives were saved." "Thank goodness," Ino said. "When this is all over, can you imagine how interested people will be in Azarin's terraforming tech? This rock is going to be a Gaia world in a few years' time." "The Desticans might have made off with one of the nuclei," Rylan added. "My people didn't find it before the Kailasha took off. And if it was inside the wreck of your ship—" "Then Delegate has the last one," Ino concluded. "I hope he finds a nice big planet to use it on." She sighed and leaned on Rylan's shoulder. He put an arm around Ino and held her close. Ino noticed that he seemed tense. "What's wrong?" she asked. "I am anxious," Rylan admitted. "If I am elected Oracle, it would be seen as improper for me to continue having a romantic relationship with an officer in the Coalition, regardless of how strongly I advocated for alliance." "Oh." Ino felt her heart drop into her stomach. She particularly enjoyed her nighttime meetups with Rylan. Now that she had a cranial implant, she could interface with Rylan's cybernetic enhancements, which added a layer of creativity between the sheets that both of them liked. "So, if you do become Oracle, I guess that would be the end of us?" Ino said. Rylan scowled at the sky, the silver plating on his forehead reflecting the light from the gas giant above. He seemed unwilling to answer. "I wish it did not have to be so soon," Rylan finally confessed. "We've only just begun." Somewhere in the back of her mind, Ino put the metaphorical puzzle pieces together. Rylan had told a little white lie earlier, and now he was trying to put off the inevitable. Ino put her hand on his chest and sighed. "I don't want this to end either," she said. "When we first met, we were just trying to help each other out of a bad situation. But then you just kept lending a hand, and you're one of the few people I know who's a real friend to AI, and..." She trailed off for a moment, then found her words again. "I don't want this to end. But I know we both have our own duties. So, I'll stay with you as long as you want me to, Oracle Quinn." She winked at Rylan. He looked at Ino and let out a great, relaxing sigh, as though a weight was lifted from his shoulders.
As you're on your way back home, something catch your eyes untold. Fear of darkness lingers here. You tremble as you get the fear. Now you're on the cornerstone, fearing you'd be left alone. Who will lose? Who will prevail? Who will tell?